Good riddance, old woman. Those were the last words my son said to me, before slamming the door on a home I built, a life I nurtured, and a family I once believed in. My name is Eleanor Grace. And from wherever you're watching this, stay with me. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been discarded by someone you once carried, like love had an expiration date, and you were suddenly past it? Because that's what it felt like. That morning, my son Marcus stood in the living room with the same posture I used to fix as a child, now towering over me with a disgusted face I barely recognized. I had raised that face. I had fed it, kissed it, wiped tears from its eyes. But that day, that face said I was worthless. You just sit here all day. You don't even do anything, he spat, motioning toward the couch where I had rested my bad leg. This isn't a retirement home, Mom. I need the space. You need to go. My heart didn't break with a loud crack. No, it cracked quietly, like an old window pane flexing under storm winds. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply stood up, picked up the one small leather bag I had packed the night before. I had known this was coming. He laughed. And when I paused at the door and turned back, he looked annoyed, like I was taking too long to disappear. I smiled gently, not because I forgave him, but because I understood him now. Take care of the house, I said softly. And I walked out in silence. It was the same house I'd inherited from my grandfather. The one I maintained through my husband's long illness, through single motherhood, and through 2 jobs while Marcus found himself in college on my dime. The same house I gave to him freely as a gift, when he said he wanted to raise a family there. But in his eyes, I had overstayed my welcome. I took nothing but my small bag, a few documents, and a ring my late husband had given me before he died. I didn't even ask for a ride. I walked to the bus stop, sat on the cold bench while the world moved around me like I was invisible. Nobody noticed the old woman gripping her leather bag like it held a secret. But I noticed. I noticed everything. I noticed how Marcus didn't ask where I would go. I noticed how he didn't care that I had been paying the property taxes in secret for the past 3 years. And I noticed one last thing, something he never would. The safe in the back of the house? The one behind the mirror in the master bedroom? The one with the deed to the house and the $1.4 million in quietly invested retirement funds I had never touched? I had emptied it 3 nights ago. He didn't know that the house was still legally mine, or that the only reason the roof hadn't collapsed over his pride was because I had quietly, silently, kept paying for everything while he hustled. So when I left with more than a bag. I left with the final piece of leverage. Because sometimes, when a mother walks away, she's not abandoning the house. She's watching it crumble. Marcus wasn't always like this. He used to cling to my skirt when he was small, crying if I left the room, his tiny voice calling out, "Mama, wait for me." I waited. I always waited. Through scraped knees, schoolyard fights, panic attacks before math tests. Even his first heartbreak, I stayed awake all night just to make sure he didn't spiral. But somewhere along the way, Marcus stopped calling me Mama, and started calling me a burden. His change wasn't sudden. It was slow, subtle, like dust creeping over a painting you forget to touch. He started talking less, visiting less. The texts came without emojis, without warmth. And after college, which I paid for every last dollar, he came back home with a chip on his shoulder and entitlement in his voice. I gave him the house. It was supposed to be temporary, just until he got on his feet. But the roots of ingratitude grow fast when you water them with silence. He got a job, a mediocre one he constantly blamed for not seeing his potential. But I still cooked, cleaned, paid for the plumbing when it burst that winter. I even paid the mortgage a few times when he forgot. He never asked how I managed. And I never told him that I sold the last piece of my jewelry, my mother's gold bracelet, to make sure his lights stayed on. Because that's what mothers do, right? But the more I gave, the more invisible I became. He started throwing parties without telling me. He moved my things into the laundry room to make space. Then, one day, I heard him tell a girl at the party, "That's just my mom. She doesn't really do anything. She's like background." Background. I raised a man who now treated me like wallpaper. And when I confronted him about it, he laughed, said I was being dramatic, said he was just joking, said I needed to chill. But the line that broke something deep inside me? You should be grateful I let you stay here, Mom. Most people your age are in homes. Homes. Like the one I built. Like the one I gave him. That was when I started planning. It wasn't rage. It wasn't vengeance. It was survival. I began organizing my files, the deed, the bank accounts, the trust fund I never told him about. I met with a quiet, retired lawyer who had helped my father back in the day. He told me exactly what I needed to do. The house was still in my name. I had just let Marcus believe it was his. And that trust fund? He thought I had spent it on my simple lifestyle. He had no idea I'd been investing small, consistent amounts since before he was born. The balance? $1.4 million. My name. My control. So I moved the funds. Secured the deed. Emptied the safe he never cared to open. And packed my bag. Not with clothes, with documentation. Because when you raise someone to believe they're owed everything, you better prepare for the moment they realize they were never holding the power. It wasn't just the words. It was the way Marcus looked at me. Like I was an inconvenience he couldn't wait to delete. The first real warning sign came during a phone call I wasn't supposed to hear. I had just returned from the corner store, my knees aching from the cold, and the front door was cracked open. Marcus was in the living room, pacing with his Bluetooth in. She's still here. I don't know. Man, it's weird. She just won't leave. He laughed. She thinks this is still her house or something. I swear, bro, once she's out, I'm gutting this place. Hardwood floors, gaming den, rooftop deck. I've already got buyers interested. Buyers? I stood frozen in the hallway. I didn't make a sound. I just quietly stepped back and eased the door closed behind me. My fingers trembled around the grocery bag, but I forced myself to walk in calmly, like I hadn't heard a thing. That night, I couldn't sleep. Buyers. Renovations. He was planning to sell the house. The house that carried my husband's laughter in the walls, the scent of my mother's stew in its floors, the baby height marks still penciled inside the pantry door. He hadn't just turned on me. He was preparing to erase me. It all started to make sense. The sudden interest in real estate podcasts. The guest visits from that slick-talking friend of his who always wore a designer belt and smelled like cold ambition. The way Marcus had recently started asking about the house's paperwork. Just wondering, he'd said, in case something happens. You know, inheritance laws and all. He thought I was dying. Or maybe he was hoping I would. But what he didn't realize was that I had been watching him, too. I started paying attention. He left his laptop open one day while stepping out for a beer run. I didn't open anything. I didn't have to. His inbox was up on the screen. And right there in bold letters was an email titled, Preliminary Offer, $1.2 million, pending clearance. I stared at the screen. He had already started the sale process. He didn't know the house was still under my name. He assumed, wrongly, that I had signed it over years ago. What broke my heart wasn't the betrayal. It was the fact that he hadn't even asked, hadn't even sat down to say, Mom, I'm in trouble. I need help. I would have listened. I always listened. But now? Now I was listening for something else. The sound of Karma getting dressed. 2 days later, I took my walker, the one he hated seeing in the living room, and pushed it slowly down the hallway. I knocked gently on his door. He looked up from his phone, barely interested. I'm heading out for a few days, I said. To where? I smiled. Just clearing space. Like you asked. He shrugged. Good. About time. I left that evening with my one leather bag and a file folder tucked deep inside it. The folder contained everything. The deed, the trust account confirmation, even the notice I had filed quietly with the county about the property freeze. Because before you teach someone a lesson, you have to let them believe they've won. I didn't check into a hotel. I didn't stay with friends. I went to a place no one knew about, a small cabin 2 towns over, one I inherited from my aunt long ago but never spoke of. No phone calls, no texts. Just the sound of birds, firewood, and truth cracking in the silence. It was time to disappear. But not to hide, to prepare. First, I called my lawyer. Mr. Ellis had known me since I was 22. He helped my father draft the original deed and had watched me build my life one brick at a time. He answered on the second ring. "Is it time?" he asked, without surprise. "It is," I said. "Initiate the transfer. Freeze everything connected to the property. And schedule the deed pull." There was a pause on the other end. "Are you sure you want to go through with this, Eleanor?" I looked out the window of the cabin. The woods swayed gently, like even nature understood. "He said I was a burden," I whispered. "It's time he learns who is carrying what." After the call, I made a checklist. Freeze Marcus's access to the joint property insurance. Remove my name from any joint utility bills. Let the new expenses roll in. File an alert with the housing board about unauthorized listings under my property address. Pull all digital and paper copies of the deed into my full possession. And, most importantly, lock the trust fund. Marcus had no idea, but the $1.4 million wasn't just cash in a bank. It was diversified, quiet shares in 3 companies I'd invested in since 1999, all under a private trustee name. I redirected the dividends to a private account, one that Marcus had no legal path to. Not anymore. I spent the next 48 hours orchestrating everything with surgical precision. Each step was a pin pulled from the grenade I'd been holding in my chest for years. Back at the house, I knew Marcus would begin to notice. The cable? Cancelled. Water bill? No autopay. Insurance letters? Marked, address removed by owner. And the safe? That old black box bolted behind the bedroom mirror? Empty. 3 days after I left, he texted. "Marcus, hey, you forgot your walker." Marcus. "Also, do you still have the login for the property tax site?" Marcus. "Mom?" Marcus. "WTH. Why are the utilities bouncing back?" Marcus. "Call me." I didn't reply. Not to punish. To give him space to feel the weight I'd been carrying. The following morning, I made one last call to the real estate company I knew he was trying to use. "Hi," I said, my voice firm but polite. "This is Eleanor Grace, sole legal owner of 119 Maple Lane. I'm calling to inform you that no authorization has been given to list this property. Any listing activity is fraudulent and will be pursued." The agent on the other end sputtered, then quickly apologized. "I'll pull the file right away, ma'am." "Please do." By noon, the listing was gone. And Marcus? He still had no idea how deep the hole went. Because sometimes, revenge doesn't come with screaming or slamming doors. Sometimes it walks away quietly, then returns like thunder. 3 days after I left, the cracks became too big for Marcus to ignore. He called. Twice. Then 5 times. Then he left a voicemail, the first in years where his voice didn't sound smug. "Mom, I don't know what's going on. The power's off. The safe is empty. There's a problem with the house paperwork. The bank says your name is still on everything. Please call me back." I didn't. Instead, I listened to his words again in the cabin, sipping tea and watching the fire dance like it knew what was coming. The next day, Marcus tried to access the trust account. Of course, it bounced back. The trustee sent me a secure message. Attempted login blocked. No access granted. I smiled. It was time for the final move. I returned to the city. Not to the house, but to the county clerk's office. I submitted a formal ownership review, showing the title, insurance records, tax history, and all bills paid in full under my name. The clerk nodded solemnly. Within hours, I had an official document in hand, proof of exclusive ownership. The house wasn't his. It never was. While Marcus was busy throwing parties, calling me background noise, and laughing at his burden of a mother, I was the one holding the foundation together. And now, the scaffolding he leaned on was gone. I delivered the notice by courier. To Marcus James Grace, this serves as a formal revocation of all living and legal rights to the property located at 119 Maple Lane. You are required to vacate the premises within 72 hours. He must have thought it was a prank. until the property manager arrived the next morning with a locksmith and a police officer standing beside him. Marcus refused to open the door, so they opened it for him. I didn't need to be there to imagine the scene, him scrambling around in boxers, yelling that this is MY house, as the officer calmly pointed at the paperwork. It's not anymore. I received a photo an hour later, a pile of trash bags and suitcases on the curb. My grandmother's china set? Shattered. My husband's bookshelf? Tossed into the driveway. But I didn't feel anger. I felt release. The kind that comes after years of carrying someone else's weight while they spat on your hands. Later that evening, Marcus texted me again. Marcus, you're really doing this? Marcus, after everything I've done for you? Marcus, you're ruining my life. I finally replied. Me? You sold me first. I just sent the receipt. He didn't respond. I turned off my phone, lit a candle, and sat in silence. Because this wasn't just payback. It was recognition that I was no longer the silent supporter, the wallpaper mother, the invisible soul holding up ungrateful bones. I was the storm he never saw coming, and he was finally getting wet. 3 days after he was evicted, Marcus showed up at my cabin. Not to apologize, not to reflect, but to beg. I watched from behind the curtain as he stood outside, shivering, his hoodie half-zipped, cheeks flushed with panic. He didn't know I'd seen the news earlier that morning. His failed sale had been flagged in the local business paper. Prospective home sale falls through after owner reclaims deed. Legal dispute erupts over $1.2 million listing. Apparently, the buyer had already paid a deposit. Marcus had promised a quick close. But there was nothing to close. Because he never owned it. He knocked again. Louder this time. Mom. Open the door. Please, I didn't know. I didn't know you still had the deed. I didn't move. He shouted, I'm homeless, Mom. You can't just leave me like this. I smiled bitterly behind the curtain. That's exactly what he did to me. Eventually, he gave up. I heard his footsteps crunch away through the gravel. Later that day, I received an email from a realtor I'd worked with before. Apparently, Marcus had tried to apply for emergency housing loans, but his credit was in shambles. The unpaid utilities, the car lease in my name he defaulted on, even the forgotten student loans, they were all coming back now. One by one, the cards he had stacked fell. No house, no job. He had been fired for leaving work to handle personal affairs. No friends. The party crowd disappeared the second the drinks dried up. Meanwhile, I returned to the city quietly. I didn't take back the house. I donated it to a women's shelter initiative I had supported quietly for years. They turned it into transitional housing. The master bedroom, where I had cried in silence so many nights, was now a safe place for single mothers. The pantry with the baby height marks? Still intact. But now, new hands were adding their own. I left a note in the kitchen drawer before handing the keys over. This house once held silence. May it now echo with strength. Marcus didn't know, but he'd soon find out. Because 2 weeks later, he came back to the house. Tried to use his old key, only to find the locks changed and a group of women cooking dinner in the kitchen. One of them told me he just stood there for a long time, frozen. When they asked who he was, he mumbled, I used to live here. Used to. He walked away slowly, carrying nothing but a phone that no longer connected to anything. No car. No job. No backup plan. He had tried to sell what he didn't own, throw out the one person who'd protected him, and then cry foul when the ground crumbled under his own arrogance. That's the thing about entitlement. It builds castles on sand. And when the tide comes in, only the truth remains. I didn't go back to the house. I didn't need to. Some roots, once pulled, don't need replanting. They just teach you how deep you've grown and how far you can go. After signing the final transfer to the Shelter Foundation, I walked to a nearby cafe. Ordered myself a slice of lemon tart and a chamomile tea. Sat by the window. And for the first time in years, I didn't check my phone. Because no one needed anything from me anymore. And that silence? It felt like peace. In the weeks that followed, I moved into a sunlit condo downtown. Just one bedroom, but it overlooked the river. Every morning, I'd open the curtains and watch the city breathe. I joined a book club, started volunteering at a center for young women navigating estrangement and financial abuse. They called me Miss Eleanor. And they listened when I spoke, because I knew what it meant to give everything and be left with nothing but your name. I told them, there's power in walking away quietly, because while they laugh, you build. One of them asked if I miss Marcus. I didn't lie. I said, yes, but I don't miss who he became. I miss the boy I raised, not the man who forgot who raised him. I'd later learned through a mutual acquaintance that Marcus was sleeping on couches. No one wanted to rent to him. His reputation had spiraled after the failed house sale made local headlines. Apparently, even his ex-girlfriend sued him for fraud. The friend said he was trying to start fresh. I hoped he did, but I no longer planned my life around his redemption. Instead, I traveled. I took a solo trip to the Grand Canyon, something I'd always wanted to do, but never had the time for. I stood at the edge and cried not from sadness, but from release. Because in that vastness, I realized something. I was never just a mother. I was never just a caretaker. I was a woman who had endured, survived, and chosen to rise. And rise I did. One day, the shelter sent me photos. The living room, my old one, now filled with laughter, toddler toys, and holiday lights. A woman stood in the kitchen holding her newborn, smiling softly with eyes that had clearly known pain. I stared at the picture for a long time. That house had a new purpose now. It no longer needed me. And I no longer needed to prove I was worthy of space. My life was quiet, but it was mine. Built not on resentment, but renewal. Not on revenge, but restoration. Because sometimes the best way to rise is to let go of the people who only ever wanted to stand on your shoulders. It happened on a Sunday, the kind of golden afternoon that made the world feel like it had finally exhaled. I was sitting outside my condo, tending to the small herb garden I'd planted on the balcony. Mint, basil, lavender. Things that grow when you water them slowly, with care. The things I wish someone had once done for me. That's when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door, and there he stood. Marcus. Thinner. Paler. Shoulders caved in like a man trying to fold into himself. His hair was unkempt, the bags under his eyes heavier than I'd ever seen. He looked lost. Hi, Mom, he said. I didn't say anything. Just watched him. Waited. He reached into his coat and pulled out a wrinkled envelope. Inside was a letter. Not a grand apology. Not a dramatic confession. Just a few lines in shaky handwriting. I thought I was owed everything, but I never realized who gave it all. You didn't abandon me. I abandoned the only person who ever stayed. I understand now. I just wanted you to know. My hands trembled slightly as I held it. He looked at me, desperate for something. Maybe forgiveness. Maybe closure. Maybe just acknowledgement. Do you want to come in? I asked quietly. He shook his head. I don't deserve that. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Then he paused. But could I just sit here? On the steps. For a bit. I nodded. He sat in silence while I returned to my herbs. We didn't speak. We didn't cry. We just breathed in the same air, for the first time in what felt like forever. When he finally stood up to leave, he said, "Thank you for not slamming the door." I smiled gently. I didn't need to slam it, Marcus. I already walked through it. And that was the truth. Because I had finally crossed over into a life where I was not a burden. Where I didn't have to beg to be seen. Where my name, my presence, didn't come with conditions. I had nothing left to prove. Marcus faded into the street. And I returned to my lavender, clipping a few sprigs to dry inside. As the sun dipped below the skyline, I poured myself a glass of wine. Raised it to no one in particular. To the mothers who held everything together. To the women who left quietly and rebuilt loudly. And to every person who was once treated like background, you were the foundation all along. My story doesn't end with revenge. It ends with freedom, and the kind of peace that money can't buy, but strength can earn. They called her a burden. She carried their world. They called her unworthy. She gave them everything. But when she left, they finally learned who really owned the house and the heart they took for granted.